If Doom is the grandfather of the modern FPS, then Halo Combat Evolved is definitely the father, taking what had been done before it, blowing it up to a scale the world had never yet seen, and setting precedent after precedent after precedent. Launching exclusively on the original Xbox nearly 20 years ago, or depending on when you're watching this, many more years ago, the game released to critical acclaim, spawning a multi-billion-dollar franchise, cementing its place in the pop culture ether. Halo CE is one of my favorite games, with the first three defining a huge part of my childhood and teenage years, so I will have to try my very best to tamp down my internal bias, but it's been 8 or 9 years since I've played through it, so while there was a lot that was familiar, there's a lot I noticed for the first time, which made the experience an interesting one for me. But with 6 mainline Halo games coming out since Combat Evolved's initial release, will a modern gamer playing the game for the first time get much out of it? With the upcoming release of Halo Infinite, I thought it'd be appropriate to try and answer that question. Let's find out if Halo Combat Evolved holds up. First and foremost, I want to get a major elephant out of the way. The multiplayer does not hold up. I played one game of the multiplayer via the Master Chief Collection, and while it was kinda silly, there's not much to get out of it. Compared to the likes of Overwatch, Fortnite, and hell, even Halo Reach, which has a pretty dedicated community still, there's just no possible way a 2001 arena shooter is gonna hold a candle. With that said, the majority of what we're gonna discuss here will focus on Combat Evolved's campaign.
We're gonna make it, aren't we, sir? I don't want to die out here. Look!
Even though the Halo series has perhaps now come to be known more for its multiplayer offerings, Combat Evolved first and foremost tried to do two things. Tell a unique and engaging science fiction story.
If Halo is a weapon, and the Covenant gain control of it, they'll use it against us and wipe out the entire human race.
And do things with its gameplay that had never been done before. We're going to take a look at both of these aspects today, but first I want to discuss the visuals. For my playthrough for this piece, I played on PC using the MCC as it was the simplest way for me to record gameplay, and the MCC is probably the most accessible way to play the game today. I primarily played on the original graphical settings rather than the updated 2011 anniversary graphics because, well, I'm seeing if the original game in its original form holds up, but it's worth discussing anniversary briefly here. It somewhat kills me to say it because I grew up playing Halo Combat Evolved, but if you're gonna play the game, I'd recommend most people play the Anniversary Edition. Whether it holds up aside, it does do a lot to modernize the game, specifically with its updated sound and lighting effects. I will say that there are places where the updated visuals seem to be a strict negative to me stylistically. For instance, while the updated lighting looks more realistic, some of the aesthetic design choices seem worse. There are certain places where the lighting is completely different, which somewhat kills some of the ambience in certain scenes. Or like here, where they straight up remove the blood splatter, which helps in the build up to the flood reveal. On the whole, I'd say this is probably the best way to play the game, but if the original graphics don't bother you at all, I think there's some merit in playing the game the way it was released. As for whether the original graphics hold up, well, the answer is a pretty clear no. Video games have come a long way in the last 20 years, and there's just not much positive to say as to whether it holds up. There are some cool art design choices, and these were pretty groundbreaking at the time, but they look unquestionably dated today. Moving on to the story, Halo's plot falls in the backdrop of a war between humanity 500 years in the future and an alliance of alien races known as the Covenant. The Covenant has humanity with its back to the wall, being far more advanced and eager to annihilate the entire human species. In a desperate attempt to lead the Covenant away from Earth,
Cortana, all I need to know is did we lose them?
I think we both know the answer to that.
the human ship, the Pillar of Autumn, stumbles upon a massive structure known as Halo. Players take the role of John 117, more commonly known as the Master Chief, a member of an elite group of super soldiers known as Spartans. The plot of Combat Evolved centers around discovering the true nature of Halo. its purpose, and why the Covenant are so deeply invested in understanding it.
So, what sort of weapon is it?
What are you talking about?
Let's stay focused. Halo, how do we use it against the Covenant?
This ring isn't a cudgel, you barbarian. It's something else. Something much more important.
Final spoiler warning, it turns out Halo is a super weapon, and the Covenant feel it is their religious duty to activate it. While all of these elements are explored far deeper in Halo 2 and 3, the story of the original Combat Evolved is fairly simple but solid. While I think some of the dialogue-to-dialogue writing holds a little to be desired, the mystery of Halo is a compelling one, and the game is very well paced in terms of doling out information and does well to keep players engaged in its story. One of the most noteworthy moments in Combat Evolved's story is the narrative shift that occurs about halfway through when you stumble upon the Flood, a parasitic life form that turns any living being into a horrific, infectious monster. This is one of the most iconic moments in all of gaming history, and I can say that this still resonates today. Not only is the Flood reveal really interesting from a story perspective, but it also helps keep the gameplay fresh, introducing a slew of new enemies in the form of the various Flood types and the Sentinels. On that note, I want to say that the game is generally well paced from a game design perspective. Every level has something new and interesting to mix things up, either with its gameplay, level design, or its environments. The level after the Pillar of Autumn, Halo, introduces players to the iconic Warthog and new varieties of Covenant, as well as some new weapons.
This cave is not a natural formation. Someone built it, so it must lead somewhere.
After that, Truth and Reconciliation begins as a stealthy sniper-focused level before transitioning into having the player board a Covenant ship, and so on. The only major issue is that at a certain point the game forces you to do some backtracking, with much of the latter half of the game's environments almost directly mirroring the front half. 2 Betrayals returns the player to the snowy corridor-filled environment of Assault on the Control Room. Keys brings you back to the Truth and Reconciliation. And the Maw has the player returning to the charred remains of the Pillar of Autumn. I'm sure this has to do with limits on time or technology or budget or whatever, and the game does try to keep things somewhat fresh in these instances, but this is overall a negative that I think a modern gamer is almost certainly going to notice. If you're a fan of 80s style Space Marine action, there's a lot to love here. I personally can take it or leave it, but if you're a fan of James Cameron's Aliens, you're going to find a lot to like, not the least of which being the Marines and their charming and realistic chatter.
Don't bother getting up.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Oh man, we're trapped in here. We're screwed. We're screwed, man.
We almost start to venture into copyright infringement.
Let's go, people. They ain't paying us by the hour. Let's go. Hit them out.
Hit them, Marines. Go, go, go. The Corps ain't paying us by the hour.
And I'm telling you, I got a bad feeling about this drop.
You always say that, Frost. You always say I got a bad feeling about this drop.
Got a bad feeling about this.
Boy, you always got a bad feeling about something.
There's not a whole lot to say about the Master Chief character, but I kinda like that in this case. This is about the exact opposite of a character study as you can get, with this game definitely focusing more on telling an interesting sci-fi story, and I think it works here. Halo 4 and 5 chose to focus more on the character of Master Chief, a choice that doesn't end up working all too well in my opinion. The only other major characters are Cortana, who mostly just operates as a means to keep the plot moving, and Captain Keyes, who has a similarly faceless function. There's a lot of charm to the side characters, with certain people standing out like Echo 419 pilot Fohammer and Sergeant Johnson, who despite dying in this game is brought back in the sequels by, I guess the power of love from his fans, but even then he's mostly in the background here, with his character being fleshed out more in the sequels. The background characters have some pretty distinct personalities, which I liked. There are a lot of little details that help the game a lot, like the Marines being as vocal and natural sounding as they are. I liked how as the game progresses and things break down, we see fewer and fewer Marines. I also really liked just kind of running into random Marines fighting for their survival. That's one thing that works very well in Combat Evolved and still holds up today: the atmosphere.
Don't touch me, you freaks! I won't be like you. I'll die first. Find your own hiding place. The monsters are everywhere. Play dead. That's what I did. Play dead. They took the live ones. Oh God, I can still hear them. Monsters. Ah! Ah! Ah!
While the visuals themselves are notably dated, the game does a great job at making you feel like you're taking part in humanity's last stand visually and through random bits of dialogue. Overall, if you're looking for deep characters, you're not going to find them here, but I think that'll be okay for most people, especially those into interesting science fiction stories. There are enough cool sci-fi concepts to help keep people engaged, and the story is fairly interesting for what it is. I think sci-fi fans will still get a lot of Halo in that regard, but if you're not a sci-fi fan, you might be a bit disappointed because the gameplay is pretty light by modern standards. It's far from bad, and as I said before, the game does pretty well at keeping things fresh, but this is a place where the game is starting to show its age. It's significantly slower paced than most modern shooters, and while the combat fight to fight is fairly satisfying, I think the overall lack of enemy, weapon, and set piece variety hurts the game in 2021. The music is one of Combat Evolved's common selling points, featuring a type of orchestral sounding score that wasn't particularly common in video games at the time. Done by Marty O'Donnell in collaboration with Michael Salvatore, the iconic score definitely still holds up today. I wonder why Marty isn't known as one of gaming's biggest composers today. Let's see, he did some early Bungie games, Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, Halo 3, all great scores, Halo Reach, nothing for a while, then Destiny, then something called Golem? And that's it? Wow, what's Golem? Golem is a virtual reality game for the PSVR? Developed by, oh cool, Seattle-based represent company called Highwire Games, which was, founded by Marty O'Donnell. I wonder what else Highwire Games is making. Oh. That game.
You and Sean must have had a lot in common politically.
Yes, absolutely. We had a lot of it. We did a bunch of hate the president kind of stuff.
Well, it's sad to see you.
All right,
turn
so
on
let's
them.
just set the record straight. I am the resident raving
Republican.
conservative.
I thought that Luke
Even more than Republican.
I thought Strowman was with you though.
Who?
Luke Timmons, I thought.
I don't know. But I'm probably the most raving of
Well,
the
yeah, because
conservatives here.
you're the so there's plenty of Republicans in the office actually. I mean, we're actually a pretty
diverse
group. I mean,
'Cause
I
we
wouldn't
care
say
about
they're the
diversity.
majority, but there's plenty of normal Republicans in the office, but most of them, let's be fair, Marty, have abandoned the current administration, and you're the only one still backing them.
They're all
Staying the
slackers.
course?
Slackers,
Yeah, you're the one staying the
slackers.
course. Yeah, Marty's had a bit of a surge recently.
The
in
surge,
fact, yeah.
because the surge is working, as all the Dems know.
Well, anyway, I really enjoyed hearing the Halo score throughout my playthrough, and I think it holds up pretty darn well today. With all that said, I think the majority of modern gamers having never played Halo before would still get something out of it, whether through its interesting sci-fi story or its solid enough gameplay. While there are definitely things that date it, there's a clear reason why it has the reputation that it does. I'm gonna say that Combat Evolved does hold up with maybe a 60-40 ratio. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what video game or movie you'd like to see done next. Thanks for watching.